All My Own Words is the story of the sports writer who was the author of his own downfall. Neil Harmon didn't have any proper qualifications when he got his first job in a local paper, but he passed his retakes at O-level and set off on a journey packed with incident and controversy. He ended up with a dream job, writing for the Nationals in Fleet Street, two of the most prestigious posts in sports writing. And he was the man they called Mr. Tennis in the Times. I will call him Mr. Neil Harmon. Delighted that he's joining us live on the line from the UK. Neil, good morning to you.
Yes, good morning, Giles.
Thankfully, we've got you back on after yesterday's fun and games, but it was a Monday, and Mondays in Spain don't count. I love the way that the book introduces you, because in common with several of our generation, you sort of fell into journalism. It was something you wanted to do, but you didn't need a postgrad, a doctorate, an MD, an MA. And the reason that I mentioned the O-level retakes is because I too was of the O-level retake school.
Okay, well, it's good. It's good to know. I was. I started when I was 16 on my first local paper in Southend, and I was in the middle of, well, not in the middle. I just started doing my A levels, but I never thought I was competent enough to possibly go all the way with that, and I yearned for the chance to move into journalism, and the opportunity presented itself. In a kind of weird way, in that there was an advert in the local paper, which, had it not been for the vigilance of my careers master, I would have completely missed. So it's funny how these things kind of fall into place when you least expect them.
Well, he was sort of like Harmon, you're completely useless at everything else, so I suppose journalism is the natural place for you.
It was something like that. I mean, you read so many stories, don't you, of footballers who say, I only wanted to be a footballer, and, Mr. Jones said, well, you'll never make that because you're not bright enough, and no, I'm not an academic by any stretch of the imagination. In fact, I still look back as a bit of an absurdity that I ended up working for the Times, because if I'd have said that to Mr. Roberts back in the day in the 70s, he would probably never believe that either.
One of the things though is you start off as, and here comes the Hackney saying volume 1. You start off as a cub reporter, and you basically do everything from courtroom reporting to, and I know, village fetes to flower shows to prize marrows, and that kind of gives you your grounding, and you hone your craft that way.
Exactly, because it's all about meeting people. It's all about being able to pick a story, to be able to engage with the public. They can trust you. Hopefully, you introduce yourself. You pick up the pieces, and you write the reports. And yes, it was mundane. I mean, Canewdon Parish Council or Southend Crown Court. And, as I say, asking people in the street if they think Peter Pan's playground is going to close down, doing a vox pop, those kind of things. That's what gets you noticed in your area. And then, of course, you get the added bonus of writing on your local football team, which was absolutely my dream.
Well, exactly. But you see, therein lies the rub, as somebody once wrote, because the thing is, it's all very well saying I want to, because I get people saying I want to be a travel reporter because it's all, I want to go foreign places. And people say I want to be a sports reporter because, I get to report on all the big events. But it's all very well being there, but to actually put down in a way that is A, legible, B, can appeal to people who know nothing about football, but also the aficionados, is a difficult thing. You try writing about, anybody listening, try writing about a sporting event without just saying, and then they scored a goal, or then, he hit a six, and to try and to paint that picture, Neil.
Yes. Well, I think if you just, can I just go back a couple of years ago? I spent the season with Wycombe Wanderers, and wrote a book on that, and it turned out to be the most amazing season in their history because they were promoted to the Championship for the first time. And one of my old pals just sent me a lovely note yesterday saying he just read it 2 years after it was published, but he said it would be easy to forward in just a litany of match reports, and people aren't interested in the last-minute winner against Rochdale or who scuffed the ball over the line against Accrington Stanley. It's the personalities behind the stories and the threading together of the season as it went along, which made it such a fascinating story. And I think that was something that I learned over the years. I mean, when you spend 40 years doing something, you should pick up a few hints somewhere down the line.
One would hope to, wouldn't one?
Yeah, you would rather. And I loved doing that because that was like going back to my initial days covering the Essex Senior League and then the third and fourth division in the Football League. where Southend played, and I just, it was all about knitting together the stories behind the scenes, which is something I've loved to do all throughout my career. It's finding the thing that other people don't know that's going on, that makes you stand out, I think.
You see the unending glamour and romance of following Southend in the 4th Division. All those trips to Carlisle, for example.
Yeah, there weren't many grounds I didn't see. I think, and most of those I didn't have now been pulled down anyway. It's amazing now when you think back to places I did go to, like Southport and Workington, which no longer exist, but not in the form they were in those days. It's incredible how time goes on. But I loved those old days, travelling with the team and getting to know the players and the supporters, and that's what being a local reporter was all about.
And of course, in a pre-social media age, where now obviously everybody will be on the bus that's doing selfies and whatever, that was the lifeline from the community. Your community paper, your local paper, gave you that link with the footballers. Whereas now, perhaps to a certain extent, because if you're at a match now, you've got 8,000 people or whatever doing that, and they're on the bus as well. If they still go on buses, they don't get in the lower divisions, and they're unless the gaffer said no social media till we get there or afterwards. The team are very much sort of going direct and almost cutting out the middleman, aren't they?
Exactly. I mean, I still follow as best I can the fortunes of Southend, who are now in the National League. But it strikes me as quite weird where the local reporter now on the Echo actually after every match asks on social media the supporters what questions they think he should ask the manager. Well, with the greatest of respect, that's his job. He shouldn't have to ask the punters out there on the road what questions to ask the manager. That should be that's his role. He is the reporter, not them.
Something tells me he's getting instructions from on high to try and gather as much traffic on the social media, and therefore, and that is the way. We could go in a different way in this conversation at the moment, but that is the way that unfortunately a lot of the media is going at the moment. Back to your career. But how did you take the move from local reporting to writing for the Nationals, and obviously some of the most important and most read and most popular Nationals in the country?
Well, once again, I went from Southend to Birmingham to join the Evening Mail, and that was fortune plays such a large part, and being in the right place at the right time. I can't stress that enough. The Echo had won a prestigious award for local sports pages, and one of the panel judges was the head of sport on the Birmingham Mail, and I just sort of took the bull by the horns and said, "I'd like to come and work for your paper one day." And 6 months later, I was working for him. So I suppose you could call it youthful bravado. But the Evening Mail in those days, in the 1970s, although it wasn't a national paper, it was as good as, like the Manchester Evening News, the Birmingham Evening Mail, the London Evening News obviously was a national paper, but only in London.
Yeah.
But Birmingham was a huge, huge paper. I mean, it sold almost 1 million copies. Just massive. And so that was my next step.
And two words for you here, Trevor Francis, of course, at that point.
Yeah, Trevor Francis. I mean, the first team I was allocated when I moved to the Midlands was West Bromwich Albion, and Ron Atkinson, who I'd met when he was manager of Cambridge, had become the manager, and they were the most. I was so lucky; they were the most exciting team in the league at that time. I mean, I can name the team now, but you just pick players like Cyril Regis, Laurie Cunningham, Brian Robson, John Weil, Ali Robertson, Derek Statham. I mean, if Albion had that team today, they wouldn't be in the mess they're in. That was a fantastic side, and there I was, a kid from Essex, suddenly thrust into the middle of this fantastic First Division club, going great guns. So that was a real kind of baptism of fire.
And also, of course, with Cunningham and Regis, that was making a statement, because this is the late 70s, and we have these two players who are going on to become part of the Three Musketeers, and make quite a statement in late 70s Britain about black players.
Well, I say right in the book, I'd never met a black footballer until I went to the Midlands in 1978. And the first three I met were the Three Degrees, Cunningham, Regis and Brendan Batson. So, suddenly you're into a completely new way of thinking and writing. And I don't know why it was, but I'd struck lucky because the three of them were super guys at the same time.
Yeah.
And I got on extremely well with all three of them. Two of them are sadly no longer with us, which is a great, great shame. But but Laurie especially, he was the quiet one. But somehow I found a spirit between he and I, and he invited me out when he joined Real Madrid to come and stay with him and take over, cover his first initial steps. So that was a real kind of coup for me. I just love the guy. It was so sad the way his life ended.
Yeah, indeed.
Just a great footballer, a great footballer. I looked at the England team yesterday playing Iran. I thought, if those great young players, and Laurie was right up there with them. He was as good as any of the young ones who are coming through now.
Yeah, and also interesting, it's the way that you were allowed to build a relationship with players and sports people, because there wasn't the constant demand of social media. There was money involved. Francis becoming the first £1 million player in the UK. Shock horror. But there was, if you like, an understanding between players and press. Whereas now, because you have PR people, you have agents, you have social media, it's all controlled. And they are, in a certain way, divorced from reality, because they are so closeted now, what with academies or whatever, from an early age, that they're wary, if you like, of talking to the press or being exposed on social media.
Well, that's right. I mean, our access was pretty tremendous when I think back. You had to go and stand in the car park or outside the ground or down at the training ground. But you're right, Giles. There was no such thing as a press officer. These people didn't exist. Now every club has about 30. I don't know how reporters today can do their job, because they have to second guess. They have to leap so many hurdles to actually get to the person they want to get to. And all we did was as I say, was rock up to the Hawthorns and catch them as they were coming off the training pitch. That's where you built your relationships.
You were writing about football, one of the ultimate team sports, but also you wrote about tennis. And alongside boxing, I think that's the ultimate solo sport, because, with boxing, you're in front of, I don't know, say 30,000 people at a big event and on a fight night. And if you get it wrong, you're on your own. And the same with tennis, because tennis isn't just whacking a ball back across a net. It is, in no other sport, it's more cerebral than perhaps in boxing, because, you look at the style of play, people are, if it's going wrong with a tennis player, in the full glare of public, he's got nowhere to hide. Whereas with a team sport, he can sort of shuffle to the back a bit.
Yeah, I mean, once again, I was very fortunate the era I came in to start writing about tennis, and really fell on my feet, because by this time I was in Manchester on the Daily Mail in the Northern office, which was a wonderful place. I had my best moments there. And a fluke opportunity came to come and do tennis, which meant 5 weeks in the summer, 3 tournaments before Wimbledon, and then the championships themselves. So there I was, 24 years old, suddenly walking into Wimbledon. And that is very special. But yes, the players around at that stage were the Navratilovas, the Everts. Graf was coming through. On the men's side, you had Connors and McEnroe and Borg and Becker coming in. So once again, a royally brilliant lineup of players. And you looked at them and thought, you're right. How do you do this? How do you keep that level up? And people obviously had their threshold of being able to control themselves. And I'm thinking obviously Mr. McEnroe, Mr. Connors at this moment, who vented their anger, their frustration if their levels were below where they expected them to be by taking it out on themselves, the umpires, the fans, the media. But once again, just fascinating characters, and I'm very lucky that to still call them mates. And it was a fascinating time as well as transition, because you'd had that sort of Borg mania in the late 70s and McEnroe, and I remember McEnroe beating Borg in, was it 1980, the fight when he won, the Super Brat won, and I remember my friend's mum going, "Oh, that's appalling! The Brats won Wimbledon. It was like the end of the world with his red headband." But then during the 80s, the sport transitions to become this global. We start to get more sponsorship. You start to get the graphs. You start to get the boom boom. Becker comes on board. Cash wins Wimbledon, and then we get Agassi coming in, in 1990, and suddenly tennis players, rather than being these sort of quiet chaps and girls, in nice skirts and wooden rackets, you start to see sponsorship come in. You start to see Lendl come in, and those sort of players, and it becomes more of a global game. Well, and there was on the women's side too. These young superstars suddenly emerged. I mean, Graf was an extraordinary player. I think still the best I ever saw. And then just after her, I mean, she began to dominate. And then came Celes, Sanchez, and then Capriati, of course, who was 14 when I first saw her play in 1990. An incredible talent. I mean, I got sent out to Florida to cover her first tournament on the WTA tour, and she got to the final. She lost to Gabriela Sabatini in the final, but you just think, my God, suddenly there were millions of dollars being talked about.
It's interesting,
not just thousands. You know, it was going to a whole new spectrum of talent and reward for that talent.
And interesting you mentioned Florida, because obviously over the weekend we had the passing of Nick Bottiglieri, wasn't it, over the weekend, who set up that sort of that machine line of players coming out of that tennis academy in Florida.
Yes, I mean, I don't want to. I'd heard that he was still alive.
No.
Yesterday. Maybe I'm.
Oh, I was getting news in yesterday that he'd passed away. So unless,
well, I'd have to double check that. But yes, but Nick coached Agassi and Jim Courier. There weren't many players he didn't actually have a kind of say in. And Nick was
okay.
absolutely a wonderful man. I used to love when I was at the US Open and we used to travel out on the coach. Nick would often be on the same coach as I was on, and I'd love to go and sit next to him just for 45 minutes. And I barely get a word in edgeways, and Nick would talk us through the current trends and the coaching attitudes and what have you. And just magic. He was magical.
And just another thing, I mean, the game, you mentioned Ron Atkinson before, and the game, but all sport was full of characters, you know, Ferguson, etc. Whereas now, again, it seems to be we have the reporting of the soundbite, the tweet, or the carefully manufactured phrase.
Well, I hope that if people do buy the book, they allow me to. They'll learn a little bit more about the personalities and the way they ticked. And you're right, Big Ron is and remains a very good pal of mine. I mean, he had his moments when if he wasn't happy with you, he let you know, and the same was definitely true of Alex Ferguson. I had one or two major run-ins with Fergie, but then again, I wasn't alone in that in the journalistic world. I think I was banned at least 3 times from Manchester United. But the day I resigned from the Daily Mail, the first person on the phone was Alex Ferguson. So you do learn a lot about people more perhaps when things aren't going well for you than you do when they are.
So the book is called All My Own Words, and
yes.
there just explain to us the situation that led to the title of the book. In other words,
yes. Well, quite simply, when in 2014 I was made aware that I'd been I'd used the work of other people in writing the Wimbledon Tennis Annual, and hadn't given them requisite acknowledgement, i.e., in a sense, it was stealing, if you can put it that way. I mean, I had no clue that this had happened. It was more kind of speed and trying to get the thing done than, I mean, who if they were tennis correspondent at the Times, would suddenly start nicking people's work thinking, well, I'm going to get sacked. You wouldn't do it, would you?
Of course not.
It was just ridiculously quick to try and get this thing done. And I was very, very careless. So if you lose your job by, as it were, say, stealing other people's work, if you're going to write a book, why not call it All Your Own Words? I just thought it was the perfect title.
When you leave the papers, what was your immediate sort of reaction? Do you think, okay, well, I'm gonna take some time out here? Did you get messages of support? I mean, how did you take it, as the saying goes? Because it's a nightmare scenario, especially when you're at the point at the top of your game. Yeah,
I think personally devastating hardly does it justice. It threw me. I mean, I was 57 when it happened, and you're getting very close to retirement. You probably think you've got a good, 5 or 6, 10 years maybe left in you. And honestly, I didn't know what to do. I was completely and utterly lost because you can't suddenly stop being a writer and you can and become a physical education teacher or a plumber or anything. There was nothing I could do. I mean, I'm pretty hopeless at DIY anyway, so I was lost. I was completely lost. And it took me a very, very long time to overcome it. And I still don't think I have particularly, because you're reminded of it on a, maybe not on a daily basis, but on a weekly, because something will happen. You'll read about something, or you'll say, I should have been writing that. I should have be doing that. That was my job. I mean, I covered Davis Cup tennis for covering Britain for 30 years almost. And the year after I'm sacked, they win the bloody thing. And we became nowhere close when I was writing about it. I went to all the shocking places of the world, covering us in Euro-Africa zone 10, 11, and 12. And next thing you know, they've won the cup. And I'm thinking, well, I should have been there. That's me. That was my role. So and people fall away. It's just, I think it's the nature of the beast sometimes, Giles. You're what's that? You're king of the hill one day and you're bottom of the heap the next. Yeah,
I mean, I was going to say, was that perhaps one of the more annoying things, depressing things, the fact that, you suddenly I'm not saying the phone calls don't get returned, but if you're at the center of it and it's all going on and suddenly you find yourself outside that circle, it can be very difficult to A, comprehend what's going on, and B, people that you think are friends or colleagues, or the people you've been dealing with on a day-to-day basis at the tennis, at the football, they're busy, they're taking calls, and they can't sort of react with you.
I completely I don't think angry. I just think disappointed, probably more than angry. But you're right. Life goes on, and you have to try and find something that you can do. And they've got their own roles to play. What I found the most disappointing, I suppose, was that I'm no worse or no less a writer than I ever was. Yet the opportunities are completely shut. When the word plagiarism is used, you're dead, effectively. So the only thing I could do to continue writing was to write books, and hopefully I'd find a publisher who would publish them. And I was lucky. I've written, this is my third, and I'm probably just about to start a fourth. So I've been fortunate in that respect, but I do miss the day-to-day involvement, seeing people, speaking to people, being around people. I just got a lovely note actually this morning from an old colleague of mine in Italy, Stefano Serrano, who said he's going to write a review of the book. He's got it and translated into Italian, and he said, what was the quote? He said, I miss your fun and your style around the press room, which are not that much fun anymore. So it's nice to know that people still do think of you, even if you're not there anymore.
You see, that's the thing, because people always say, I've scribbled a bit in my time, and people say, well, you're a hack, you're a journalist. This is me, not you, Neil. And why don't you write a book? And they are the difference between knocking off 250 words in half an hour to fill the space, and the discipline of writing 1,000 words, 2,000 words a day in solitude it's a difference between doing a sprint and running a marathon.
Yeah, it is. I loved it. I did like the construction of putting a book together. The first one I did was with a gambler, and I know absolutely zero about gambling, a gentleman by the name of Harry Findlay. But he had once got hold of me when I'd written about gambling in tennis and said I didn't know what I was talking about, and he'd educate me in the gambling, about how to bet on tennis. So I ended up writing a book with Harry, which was great because he was on his uppers and so was I. So that was a very cathartic experience, and he loved it. He said no one could have captured me like you did, Neil. And I couldn't really believe that. I thought there's people that know more about racing or greyhounds than I do, but I suppose not knowing about it made me ask more questions than I would have done if I'd have been an expert in gambling. And of course, because of your journalistic training, and you said all that stuff down in Southend doing the Vox Pops, and what do you think about Peter Pan's, playground closing? But when you write a book about that, it is, you can look at it as a series of interviews put together to construct the book. Whereas this one, you mentioned the word cathartic. Well, this one must have been, what was it? Douglas Adams calls it the dark tea time of the soul. So to write about, to look back on your own career and what went right and what didn't go right must have been, it's a pretty out there book, Neil. I mean, I congratulate you for it. Thank you so much. I appreciate that, Giles. Yes, I mean, first of all, finding a publisher who would do it, and if I can give a blurb to Pitch Publishing, who were absolutely terrific, that was great. Having that support, whether it will sell or not, I don't know. But to my mind, that there are those of my generation who I think will see themselves in what happened to me and the characters that I came across, both on my side of the fence and on the from sport as well. I mean, I've met some incredible people who are sports writers. I mean, they're a law unto themselves, a lot of them. And I think I tell some of those stories so people will get an insight into what it was like growing up in sports writing, and the characters, obviously, that I've mentioned before, the great tennis players, the great footballers, the great managers who as I say, have come across time and again during my writing period.
And if you think about it, though, I mean, in an age where you say, journalists are saying, send your send your questions via social media to this. And if you think about some of the characters and some of the press junkets and jaunts, I mean, European trips away with the old style press team before an age of social media and before an age of cameras. I mean, there were some quite spectacular, I should imagine, away days to be had. And, and I always talk about when I walked into the Mirror that time and the Holborn, and there was a strata of cigarette smoke over the desks. I mean, old style reporting. Yeah.
Well, very, very much so. I suppose the high point of my travelling with sports teams was going with England under Graham Taylor initially. I mean, when I became the chief football writer of the Mail, he'd just become the England manager. So this was a very tricky time for me moving into that role, for him following Bobby Robson. But the England press corps travelled with the team. It doesn't happen anymore. So our fun and games started the minute we climbed onto the plane, and then Graham, who was a lovely man in many respects, we fell out, and of course it was difficult not to, given the circumstances of the results that happened under his management. He suddenly, on a whim one day, decided that the media should fly at the front of the plane so he could keep an eye on us. He didn't trust us. So rather than us being behind him where he couldn't see what we were doing, he had us at the front so he could see. And it was, you just think, well, it's ridiculous, really. But then he banned alcohol on the planes, which, of course, one or two of my
yes.
colleagues who preferred
to calm the nerves, Neil, to calm the nerves.
Yeah, exactly right. And so that only lasted for 2 matches because we made such a fuss about it that he dropped it. Yeah, my dear old late friend from the Daily Express, Steve Curry, used to say, "Come on." He used to call me Hawkeye because I was good at finding golf balls. He said, "Come on, Hawkeye." I said, "Let's have our heart starter," which was a bloody great Bloody Mary with lashings of Worcester sauce at 9 o'clock in the morning when we were taken off from Luton Airport to fly to some godforsaken place like Poznan or Tbilisi or somewhere. And of course,
apologies to our Georgian listeners, by the way, but go on. Yes.
Yeah, I mean, but that was a pretty dark trip. And suddenly there was only tomato juice, so we had to induce one of our colleagues who was less likely to be caught bringing on drinks, to actually bring on some drinks so we could pour them into our tomato juices. So we got around it. We got around it anyway, but it was great fun. It was great fun.
What would you say, if you're looking back? I mean, there are highs. So just pick out a couple. I mean, presumably seeing like Graf play when she was in her pomp, and those, and there are occasions where football gets it spectacularly wrong. But when a match gets it right and they score in the last seconds, or they come with the wonder goals, etc. Just pick out a few for the listeners.
Yes, I suppose. I mean, the best match I ever covered, I think without a doubt, was Liverpool 4, Nottingham Forest 3. I've got that wrong. Sorry, Liverpool 4, Newcastle 3. I was thinking of Stan Collymore.
I remember watching that match on TV.
Yeah, I mean that was just when Newcastle looked as though they could pit Man United for the title, and it was an absolutely rollicking match at Anfield under the lights. Stan Collymore scored the winning goal in the sort of 92nd minute, and poor old Kevin Keegan was desolate. I mean, and then to have to write that match report. Took a bit, but it was just the adrenaline. The adrenaline was such that you got through it. And on tennis, it has to be Murray winning Wimbledon.
Yeah.
I'd gone through quite a lot with Andy. I would think I was as close to him as any of the journalists of that time. And he used to he was he is quite a character. He was very dry, quick-witted, could take you down a peg or two if he wanted to, but at the same time he appreciated what you did and the role that you had, and I think he quite enjoyed our company. But that day was just absolutely spectacular, spine tingling.
It's just that he's done it. I remember I was driving, because tennis is one of the games, one of the sports I will listen to on the radio rather than see normally. And I was driving down from the hills above Marbella, and it was just that he's done it, the commentary, and the whole. I stopped the car because suddenly that whole emotion, and sports can trigger an emotion at a subliminal level that you didn't even know you had.
Yeah, I mean, if I can just mention this very briefly, I mean that was the last Wimbledon tennis book that I wrote, and of course, the absolute pressure and adrenaline at the end of that Wimbledon to write about Murray. Then the next day, I had to write the best part of a 12-page supplement for the Times on that, and then the next day, I had to start writing the book. So I had 10 days to do it. So if I made some mistakes, which I obviously did, I think I could put a lot down to the fact that you're absolutely cream crackered at the end of such an event. And the last thing you really want to do is sit down and then write a book about it very quickly. So you think quote sheets and reports are all over your desk, and I'm picking out bits, and I've obviously picked out bits and not said, as reported in the Guardian or the Telegraph said so and so, which is basic carelessness, but at the same time not something I did with any spite or malevolence. It just happened that way, and it cost me my career.
It's understandable in the heat and the moment and under the pressure as well. Just want to bring, but by the way, I've just looked on my screens and it says, contrary to what you might have heard, I'm still alive and kicking. So you were
Nick.
Right. I was wrong about Nick.
Well, so he's not going to go without a fight. I know that. He's 91 years old, and he's as sharp as they come. Lovely man.
Exactly.
Lovely man.
He's taken to social media today. Reports of my own death have been much exaggerated, and perhaps of your own, Neil. The book is called All My Own Word. It is by Neil Harmon. Neil, if people want to find you online or on the socials, do you have a social media presence? Is there a website? Where can people track you down in the nicest possible way?
Well, I've forgotten my Twitter.
Have you now?
I think I'm Neil_Harmon57 on Twitter. I'm on Facebook. I'm on Instagram. I think I'm Harmon Neil on Instagram, Harmon.Neil on Instagram. You can find the book I think the easiest way is via Amazon.co.uk. And
you can also download it as a virtual book from our own virtual bookstore as well, Neil. Kindle
as well. And it's out there and it's available, and I love doing it. I hope people will enjoy the stories. My kind of demise has to be in there, but I think the part I enjoyed most was relating the fun times I had on the road.
Absolutely. Well, it's good to have you. It's good to know you're still writing. Let us know what happens with the next book as well. Looking forward to that. Neil Harmon, it's been an absolute pleasure to speak to you this morning.
Thank you, Giles.